Danny Joe Hawkins was the first mercenary recruited for Operation Red Dog. He was a tough guy, 37 years old, 3 children, a house in Mississippi. No military experience though, at least not in a conventional sense. Hawkins was in the clan. He held the rank of Exalted Cyclops. This means he was a local leader and probably had multiple subordinate officers. At 10:40 p.m. on September 18, 1967, there was an explosion at the Temple Beth Israel Synagogue in North Jackson, Ohio. Hours later, FBI agents arrested Hawkins and his father. They were eventually charged with assaulting the FBI officers, but not for the bombing. Hawkins was later arrested again following a bank robbery in Memphis. The FBI searched his car and found 2 rifles, a .45 caliber pistol, 2 billy clubs, and a hangman's knot. And he was arrested once again for his alleged role in the bombing of a real estate office. But he got lucky in court. The jury was all white, an impressively slippery individual. The Dominica Defense Force, the military, was trying to save the island from communism, Perdue explained. They intend to put an anti-communist named Patrick John back in power, but they need our help. Perdue said he was a captain in the Defense Force and that he had been commissioned to recruit fighters, soldiers, ready to take a stand against the plague of the 20th century. He offered $3,000. Hawkins said he would have done it for free. Meanwhile, Wolfgang Jagged, Perdue's second-in-command, was doing some recruiting of his own. He brought along Don Black, another name that is immediately recognizable to anyone with a passing familiarity with the modern far-right. Jagged thought Black was an adventurist-type person who might be interested in joining the mercenaries. "I believe in America," he said. "I believe in the principles upon which this country was founded. I believe in the Constitution of the United States. I believe in freedom." Black had been involved in the far right since he was a teenager. In the 1970s, he became Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan and led the White Robes on marches through Birmingham, a city known for racially motivated domestic terrorism. Operation Red Dog, Chapter 7, Jagged Alliance. The mercenary leader Mike Perdue had a feeling that because of his clan background, Don Black might respond better to anti-communist and pro-American arguments. "The mercs and the military are gonna put Patrick John back in office," he said. "Dominica would become a loyal ally of the United States." Perdue mentioned that he had contacts in the State Department and that the operation conforms to the ideology of the Reagan administration. Don Black was a little more intelligent than the other recruits. He didn't agree immediately. He said he'd think about it. It was time to do some research. He needed to know what he was getting himself into. And so he went to the library. There weren't many books on the subject of Dominica, but there were a couple of magazines that mentioned the island. The articles left Don Black with little doubt that Dominica was an unstable country. Undeveloped, newly independent and devastated by hurricanes, the island was vulnerable to the aggressive expansionism of Moscow and its vassal in Havana. One of the articles said that when Hurricane David shook Dominica, Cuba had sent an expeditionary force to the island, but the Dominican people dropped American flags in protest. Black never been to Dominica or anywhere else in the Caribbean, but after doing research he concluded that the island was on the verge of the communist takeover. And that was unacceptable. "I see 1/3 of the world controlled by communists," he said. "I consider that to be a very serious threat." You know, I never had a reason to think about this before, but prior to the existence of the internet, as well as search engines like Google, it was obviously much easier to trick people into committing something utterly insane, like a coup in a country they never heard of before. The Perdue Praxis. It just works.
It just works.
Mike Norris was a security guard in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. He was 21 years old and lived in half of a duplex with his wife. "I wouldn't say we were poverty-stricken, you know," he said. "We had a hard time paying our bills, you know, but I guess everybody does." Norris was recruited into the operation by Don Black through a bizarre game of Chinese whispers. At this point, Black developed his own theory of Dominica. The entire Caribbean was threatened by communism, he explained. Dominica was a at risk. The nation was impoverished. There were few jobs. The communists were building their strength there, he said. There was an internal struggle. On one side of this conflict was the military, which was pro-American and anti-communist. And on the other side was the Prime Minister of Dominica, who was trying to bring the Cubans to the island and establish a dictatorship of the proletariat. Her government was refusing to allow the army to mop up the communist guerrillas. The military wanted action, Norris was told. They wanted to arrest the Prime Minister and disarm her oppressive state police. An American company is involved. They are recruiting people to back up the Dominican military. $3,000 for a month of work. Yeah, said Norris, I would go even if it weren't for the money. Norris went to a firearms store and purchased a 9mm pistol. Don Black bought himself a .45. The purpose of carrying weapons was to defend the Dominican island against communist incursion, he said. Bill Waldrop never served in the army and he had no paramilitary training. He had been a member of Youth for Christ at Province High School in Jackson, and he was a president of the local chapter of the Patriotic American Youth Organization. Waldrop's motivations for joining the mercenaries were ideological. He assumed that the entire thing was secretly orchestrated by the US government for the purpose of establishing a base of operations in Dominica. Larry Jacklin lived with his parents in Listowel, Ontario. He worked at a furniture factory where he made $5 an hour. The balance of his bank account was $20 Canadian. Larry was young, naive, clean-cut, blonde and disenfranchised. He had spent 6 months in the Canadian Armed Forces Reserves. He was a perfect recruit. Perdue told him a couple of stories of his mercenary wars. He said the communists were about to take over Dominica. He was assembling a team. Larry Jacklin had one concern. Say, if he went to Dominica, would he have to live with blacks? Perdue assured him that he would not. Larry said, okay, he's on board. But they still needed more mercenaries. Bob Pritchard was making $3.55 an hour as a security guard in North Carolina. As a Vietnam vet, he had a $54 a month veteran's disability pension. Pritchard was a Nazi, and he was as poor as a church mouse. Kill commies for money. That's what it was all about, he said. At this point, he didn't even know which island they were going to invade. Perdue had the presence of mind to not talk about these details over the phone. Pritchard guessed it was probably Grenada. So he packed his rifle, some clothes, 2 handguns and a Nazi flag and left for the Riley airport.